Thank you for tuning in to the Red Clinic Podcast. I'm Dr. Schwalen, licensed psychologist and expert in the treatment of eating disorders. Today, we're going to do what we do best and provide education on different topics related to eating disorders and eating disorder treatment. I have a special guest with me today. Dr. Chelsea Wooley, licensed psychologist, is here joining us. She's actually a part of our team, but I'm going to let you kind of give a little bit of background if you don't mind. She's new to our team, and so I've had the pleasure of just kind of helping her find her way as she has joined recently. And so as a result, you've been hanging out with me a little bit, yes. And we've gotten an opportunity to talk a lot about eating disorders and eating disorder treatment. So go ahead, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am Dr. Chelsea Wooley. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been in the practice of psychology now for about 8 years. Been licensed for 6 of those years. But primarily my background is with adults, and that's primarily what I've been working with, but I'm new to the team and I'm really excited. I've been in training and I'm learning lots of new things, especially about eating disorders.
Okay, and that's why you're here today,
yes.
Actually, because she is a fresh set of eyes, basically just observing the work that we do so far, and hopefully maybe one day even joining in on providing some of the services to our Red Clinic clients. But I asked her to join because she is that fresh set of eyes, and I think it's really interesting to always get a different perspective. I mean, I could sit here and talk about eating disorders, I don't know how many episodes now, like 30 episodes at least. So we all know that I know about them, but when someone new is coming in and just kind of learning for the first time almost of like how eating disorder assessment is done, or what are some common themes that keep coming up with eating disorder clients, or even not so common themes, that's exactly why I wanted you here today, because you can provide some of that. So what have you noticed so far that has like stood out to you, or that you think is worthy of a deeper conversation?
Well, some of the things that I've noticed, even in the short time that I've been training and, shadowing Dr. Schwalen, is there is often other things going on. So it's not just that someone's struggling with their relationship with food or their eating patterns. There's usually other things, and it's more of a complex issue. I most recently has saw, where there's some anxiety, some depression, some issues with taking care of themselves, and it's a complex issue where I think treatment would need to approach the client in all different aspects.
I'm so glad you said that. That's really cool. So, I mean, what you're doing right now for the people out there listening is you're helping people like even just build empathy for the fact that this is not just, a choice to eat food or not to eat food, or to stop eating too much food, or whatever the issue might be. There's all these other contributing factors that really play into it. And that makes me think of the fact that really, quite commonly, I get the question when I'm recommending that a client be treated for an eating disorder. The question that usually comes after that is, well, what about my trauma or my anxiety? If we're just focusing on the eating disorder, how am I actually going to get better? Or do I need more than one therapist, like someone who can specialize in anxiety and then someone who specializes in an eating disorder? And what you're saying, or what you've noticed, is like it's kind of all happening together, and at the same time, it's not necessarily separate issues.
And I feel like, to tackle it as separate issues, you would lose the kind of complexity, because it kind of builds on each other, and
yes.
They interact in so many different ways. And so what I've observed lately is, really looking at it as a holistic approach, and also like looking at factors about how somebody grew up and how things that they've gone through in their lives, and how their thought process contributes to their eating and their current depression or anxiety. There's all these different factors that come together for the picture.
Absolutely. And so I always say we can't even treat the eating disorder unless we also treat the person holistically. Mm-hmm. And so if you're referred for eating disorder treatment and you are working with somebody who truly understands eating disorders, you will absolutely be able to address all those underlying issues as well. All the complex factors that even contribute to the eating disorder in the first place have to be addressed, have to be worked on, kind of all at the same time in order to truly make a difference for your progress.
The other thing with me shadowing some assessments is when we talk about eating, that doesn't even happen till the second half of the assessment, because the data that is gathered is all about background and how they're currently doing and things like that. And of course, we talk about eating and maybe some difficulties they're having related to an eating disorder, but that comes after all the other information. It just kind of makes sense. It kind of puts it all together in one picture.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy you said that too. So you're totally right. The way that we structure the assessment interview at the Red Clinic, what we do is a multidisciplinary team assessment, which you've been able to observe. So it's not just a psychologist, sitting and talking with the client and really gathering the history, but there's a dietitian present too. And I think what you've noticed is the dietitian is really quiet in the beginning because the psychologist is really gathering all the psychological history. So we're asking about, anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, like you said, current functioning. So, what's concentration like? What's going on with your relationships in your life? What's a day in the life look like even? And how are you doing? Just as a person, how are you doing? And then we're looking at any traumatic history or abuse history or anything like that. So all the events, if you want to put it that way, or all the experiences a person has had that culminates to the point that we're at today, right? That may be contributing to the actual eating disorder and absolutely has to be taken into consideration before we even think to ask about food or eating. Mm-hmm. So it all comes together. Mm-hmm. What else has kind of stood out to you?
One of the things that I've observed is I'm seeing some traits of individuals. So some things that I think maybe contribute to some of their difficulties and some of like their perfectionism or what I would call like black and white thinking, kind of rigid thought processes on not just like food, but other things. And I think I've noticed that, or I can see how that could get somebody kind of stuck.
Absolutely. So just remind me, you don't have any history or experience working with clients who have eating disorders.
No.
So let me just tell you that it's really impressive that you're just like picking all this up and just observing a few assessments, because there are whole talks that I've given and there's tons of research out there, and just like this overall, just the concept of there are definitely characteristics or psychological or personality traits that people with eating disorders tend to have. And so you're spot on. That is so true. We know that with more like the more controlled eating disorders, like the restriction-based eating disorders like anorexia or atypical anorexia or even bulimia sometimes, the personality traits tend to be more like type A almost, like very anxious, rigid, but high achieving, super perfectionistic, very hard on themselves. We absolutely see that. Now that's a generalization, of course, and everybody's different, but in general, it's kind of what we're seeing. And then with some of the other eating disorders, we might see a little bit more dysregulation. So not as much control, but more impulsivity or dysregulated emotional expression and just coping in general. So it's really cool that you've picked up on that just from watching some assessments.
Yeah. It's been very interesting. I'm learning a lot.
Very interesting. That's why we love the work we do so much.
Yeah.
Anything else that has stood out to you?
What I was thinking about this as I'm going through my training, and I not having any experience with working with individuals who are experiencing an eating disorder. I just imagine how hard it is in that, we have to eat to survive. And so, and some of these, some people really have these relationships with food that is really unhealthy. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we need to keep eating to survive. And it's like this cycle that goes over and over. It's like reinforced, right? I got to keep eating to survive. But every time I eat, it makes me feel sad, it makes me feel guilty, it makes me feel shame. But we got to keep doing it. And so I've seen, or I can imagine how like trying to navigate that relationship with food, knowing that we got to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. So that's one of the major differences between like doing substance abuse and addiction work and doing eating disorder work. Because a lot of times people will try to compare, an eating disorder to an addiction. And that comparison can only go so far. Because usually with substance abuse work, we just take away, right, whatever that person's addicted to and help them come up with ways to cope with that. With eating disorders, we can't do that, right? Because you have to have food to survive. So just right there is like that big difference. And this reminds me of a client that you actually observed who even had this insight, like during the assessment, when the client mentioned, I just don't want food to control me anymore. I just don't know how to get to that point because it's not like I can't eat, right? Like I have to eat to survive. So feeling trapped, feeling out of control, especially when there's eating disorder like binge eating disorder or emotional overeating or compulsive overeating. I mean, I call it all different names because sometimes it doesn't meet all the criteria for binge eating disorder per the DSM, but there's definitely some disordered eating happening and it's an emotionally based thing. And so it's absolutely something we have to navigate in treatment, and why therapy, like for recovery, can take a long time. It can be, 6 months to a year or even more when clients are recovering from an eating disorder, because it's like this fine dance that we have to do. And that's one of the reasons too why we work so closely with dietitians and other team members, because we want to make sure that the clients are healthy and they're still feeding their bodies and they're getting the nutrition they need while they're working out all this stuff psychologically.
The other thing that I've noticed is how much self-esteem and self-worth is tied to eating, and that often, or at least what I've observed so far, there is individuals who feel like they are not worth anything, that they have very low self-esteem, and it is often tied to their food or what they ate that day or their bodies. And that's seems like another factor to be addressed in treatment.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it comes out a lot in just the assessment, and then absolutely has to be considered in treatment. It's part of the treatment planning. It's objectives that we write, improving body image, improving self-esteem, but also working towards what we like to call radical self-acceptance in therapy. And helping a client get there is so difficult. I mean, one of the things I like to really think about and almost like debunk, because there's so many myths out there, especially about clients with binge eating disorder. A lot of people, not just providers, but regular people out there, will associate binge eating disorder with being overweight. And the truth is that, just because someone has binge eating disorder or emotional overeating doesn't mean they're going to present as overweight. Now, the other piece to this, though, is if someone is overweight and they have binge eating disorder, many people believe that overweight people, this is something they've done to themselves, or they're lazy or disgusting. I mean, there's so much stigma about being overweight in our society. And that's one of the reasons why we take that health at every size approach at our clinic, which really helps our clients learn that it's not really about my size or the fact that I'm living in a larger body or going through life in a larger body. It's about my quality of life, my happiness, my psychological and emotional well-being, my mental health, my physical health, all of it. But that stigma of, you are doing this to yourself, you must be lazy, you must truly not value yourself if you can go through life looking that way or eating as much as you do. This is a real thing our clients deal with. And it's not just our overweight clients or binge eating disorder clients. It's clients who have anorexia, clients who have bulimia, clients who have any kind of eating disorder where body dissatisfaction is a part of it. Because everyone in our society is susceptible to those exact messages that I just put out there, right? We live in a culture that values diet culture, that values the thin ideal. And so I think, just what you said about self-esteem and body image, it's kind of making me think about those clients in particular, because many of the clients that I have worked with that actually do have emotional overeating or binge eating disorder and who may be in the overweight range are some of the least laziest people I've ever met, some of the most successful people I've ever met, and the most hardworking people I've ever met. And generally, when you get their story, you start to learn like, oh, you're so successful and good at what you do. You work so hard at your trade or the business that you're trying to run or whatever it is, that's your number one priority. And if that's your only priority, your health is falling to the wayside. Your only coping mechanism is to go eat food. It's the only time in your life where you finally stop long enough to just like find some joy, right? Or rush of endorphins, right? Because we know dopamine is definitely implicated in eating and other neurotransmitters. And so then over time, individuals feel like I'm completely out of control. But if you look at that big picture, that holistic picture, it's because you're not prioritizing self-care. You're getting up in the morning, like awful hours, like 4 a.m., 5 a.m., you start working, you're working so hard because you're very, very successful at what you do and super driven that you don't even remember or look up to eat until 12 hours later. And so now it's like 3 p.m, you're eating for the first time. And of course you're going to be like ravenous at that point. And if that's your first break that you've taken all day, your relationship with food is going to be skewed, right? And so it's definitely about the big picture. It's not just, oh, you're overeating. How do we put you on a diet and help you with this? It's let's reprioritize the whole structure.
Mm-hmm. And then, with the example you gave about, not eating till like 3 o'clock and then you're just kind of eating probably what's quickest, what feels good. And as much as your body, you feel like you need to eat a lot, right? And then I feel like then another pattern starts where then you start to feel bad. Mm-hmm. And so then it affects the next meal and then the next meal. And it just seems like there's this pattern that keeps going where people aren't engaging in good self-care, then their eating habits are contributing to that. Mm-hmm. And then again, they're not engaging in self-care, and it's just feeding each other over and over and over again.
It's that really unhealthy cycle that they get trapped in. And when you said someone might just eat what feels good. Mm-hmm. Well, if my dietitians were here, they would say all day long, it's because of blood glucose levels and trying to, refuel the body because you've essentially deprived it all day or we're in a fast all day, right? And then that overwhelming guilt and shame that comes with what did I just do? This is exactly what I know is contributing to my low self-worth and my body image issues, but here I am just doing it again and I'm stuck doing it all the time. And it feels like completely a helpless situation for the clients that I work with. And I mean, I think you've seen some of that. Some of the clients that we see in the Red Clinic that are in the emotional eating category, not the restrictive eating category. Well, actually both of them. They're some of the most successful people really out there that we've ever met if you look at the world's definition of success. They're doing very well for themselves. They're financially independent. They're achieving huge goals. They're doing more, in a day than most people would in a week because they are that successful. But the sacrifice is their own health and their own well-being. So we have to talk a lot with our clients about prioritizing their health and making that a part of their everyday life, they end up actually being way more productive once they do that, but it takes a lot of time and effort and treatment. Anything else that has stood out to you? Because you are so keen and observant. I'm so impressed.
I was wondering kind of what your view of like control is related to people who struggle with eating disorders. Is there times, or is it related to feeling out of control and trying to feel more in control by, controlling their food or restricting their food in some way? Or is that a factor that doesn't really play as big of a part as what I'm thinking?
With an eating disorder like anorexia? Oh, absolutely. With anorexia, it's very common for individuals to have a very high need for control. And they, in radically open DBT, we would call that individual an overcontroller. So this is the type of person that's like high achieving, very productive, super perfectionistic, has all these really great qualities, but they also then have an eating disorder. And so then the eating disorder manipulates those qualities. If they're good at everything else, it's no surprise that they would be really good at their eating disorder too. And so finding a sense of control, and maybe in a world where they feel chaos, especially with clients that have history of trauma, specifically sexual trauma, tend to turn to an eating disorder like anorexia because it does provide a sense of control for many of them. Is that it?
That's it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the fresh eyes that you gave us today. It helped me kind of talk more a little bit about just like building empathy in our clients and their family members. It gave us some really good conversation about how just because someone is presenting overweight or has a difficulty with emotional eating doesn't necessarily mean that that makes them lazy or unsuccessful. It's actually quite the opposite. And so if there's anything that you take away from this episode today, I hope it is to have some more understanding and empathy for clients who are struggling with their relationship with food. There you have it. That's our Red Clinic episode for today. I can't wait to see you next week.